Welcome to today's panel, Pitching in a Pandemic. I'm Michelle Amor Gilly. I also go by Gilly. Some of you just know me as Michelle Amor because you know me primarily from social media, but I actually have a last name. I am a WGA screenwriter, producer, and college professor. I teach currently at Loyola Marymount University, and I'm super excited to be here with you today. First, I want to thank Alexandra Kostulas. Did I get that right?
Got it right.
Okay, yes, I've been practicing. Founder of the San Francisco Creative Writing Institute, and Lauren Bright, who works with her, for having us today. For those who don't know, the San Francisco Writing Institute is an independent creative writing organization founded in 2015, and they offer writing workshops in several genres to writers of all experience levels from all walks of life. During the pandemic, they created Dispatches from Quarantine with the support of the California Arts Council, which is how we're all here today. And the purpose is to examine how the coronavirus pandemic and its impact have affected creative work. Secondly, I'd like to thank my panelists, CAMILLE Tucker and Joe Carroll. Unfortunately, Bashir Gabriel, who was also listed, won't be able to attend today, but you will get plenty of incredible information, Hollywood, little secrets and details from the three of us. We have enough experience and stories to share with all of you. And last, but definitely not least, I want to thank all of you who have joined us here today. We're grateful to be able to share our experiences with you in the hopes that it may encourage and inspire you. So I'd like to give everyone a chance to just say hello from the panelists, as well as Alexandra.
In order you want us to say hello?
No, just dive in. We comfortable. Oh. Go ahead, Camille.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Camille Tucker, and Queen Michelle was my professor at LMU, and that was how we met. And I told her I would never let her go ever since. She was my professor.
She meant that.
We become sister friends and sister scribes. I am a writer. I'm the co-writer of the Clark Sisters, the First Ladies of Gospel, but I've been knocking around in this industry for a while. I've written projects with Robert De Niro as a producer, with John Singleton as a producer, have a project with 50 Cent now. Just love being in this business. I love writing. I went to UCLA. I'm a Bruin and also now a Lion. And I'm really grateful to be here today to have this conversation. I did sell and secure a few open assignment jobs during the pandemic. So I'm excited about this topic.
Great. And Joe.
Hey everyone, my name is Joe Carroll from Nashville, Tennessee, born and raised. I've been in LA since 2014. During the pandemic, I was working on a few shows you may be familiar with, most recently Bel Air, seasons 1 and 2. I also produced a few Lifetime movies. So that was another thing that kept me busy. It's a very busy pandemic. And recently wrote and directed my debut feature film, Lethal Legacy, which is currently on BET Plus and BET Her. Michelle and I have been friends for a few years. We were running around Holiday Soul together and missed each other, but became very fast friends and upgraded to cousins overnight. Here we are. So I'm very happy to be a part. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And Alexandra, would you like to just tell us anything else about the Institute or?
I'm Alexandra Kostulas. I'm the founder of the Institute, SF Creative Writing Institute. I founded it actually right around the time when I met Michelle at that conference. I remember at that conference I was saying, I'm going to be founding an institute, and then I did it. And who knew all these years later you would be a guest. And it's been a pleasure following your career online. I really admire writers, and one thing I like about writers is that you can reach out and talk to them and they'll tell you about their process. And I wanted to form a community for writers, for people from all levels of experience, where you don't need to get admission to a program. You can just start taking classes and learning on your own. And I think we've done a good job with that. One of our students is now a full-time professor at MIT in creative writing. And another one of our students sold her novel, Tracy Lynn, All That's Left Unsaid. She sold it in a 9-way bidding war to HarperCollins in the pandemic. And it's, it's been interesting watching the pandemic and how it's changed writing in our field and trying to learn from that.
Well, first of all, thank you. That's really impressive. And I want to say, and AI can't do that, right? Meaning tell you their process because they don't have one, right? Because everything that they do is basically stolen from somebody else's work. And that's why these types of panels are so important, because we can share our process with you. Also, AI cannot appear on a panel and actually hold a conversation, which is also, to me, something that I'm really proud about being able to do panels like this, just reminding everyone of the importance of writers. So saying all that, hey, to our whoever just joined, everyone, just please keep your audio muted as we're doing the panel. And then when we have the Q&A, which will be in the last around 30 minutes or so, then you'll be able to ask questions. And even though we'll say sometimes like put them in the chat, I'm just really bad at looking at the chat or remembering. So if the other panelists will also pay attention to the chat, because I'll not see it sometimes. But anyway, let's dive in. First and foremost, let's set the tone, right? So it's March 2020, and the world is beginning to shut down due to the coronavirus. I remember feeling so many emotions about what was going on and how it was affecting me personally and professionally. I was scared, I was anxious, depressed, confused. I had so many emotions. Now, this leads me to my first question for my panelists. What was your emotional state at the beginning of the pandemic? And Camille, I'd like to start with you.
Sure. Well, I, at one point, even when you met me, Michelle, was a full-time professor. And so I was actually teaching at that time, and we were talking about going remote. And like with many people, I remember going to the grocery store and there being no, toilet paper, no paper towels, no everything. And I was like, oh, I'm late on this train. And I did feel fear, but I want to say something else I felt, because I felt fear and uncertainty about, going remote and being on Zoom and having to relate to people like this. But in a way, because I'm a writer, I'm also an introvert, I'm an introvert, extrovert, probably a little more on the extrovert side, but it was sort of like, ooh, this is a time when my isolation can come out. So my fear was not only of what's going to happen, in the industry with me as a writer, or what's going to happen with me as a professor with these classes, but what's going to happen to my mental health, because I can defer to isolating and drawing and pulling away. I mean, of course, hey, more time to write. I love that. But I also get concerned about myself when I'm withdrawing from, emotional connections and experiences with, people, family, loved ones, friends. So I had a lot of questions and I didn't know how long it was going to last.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I was going through.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. And I forgot I was teaching too. And that was a big deal, right? Trying to transition from the classroom to Zoom spaces. And we saw a lot of good things, I think, that came from that, but also some very difficult things with our students. So thanks for sharing. Joe, what were you going through, my friend?
Survival. I went straight into survival mode because right around the time it started, we just finished Boomerang B2, and I just started producing the Lifetime movies. And so right around the time of the shutdown, everyone was like trying to get their unemployment, or trying to get like whatever relief funds.
Right, trying to get money, trying to survive.
Yeah, trying to survive. And at the time, I was kind of like, okay, things are shutting down. You never know how long something's going to last. You just never know. There's no indication at the beginning. I remember getting a letter or an email from unemployment saying, we're not giving you anything. Like, they had me on some kind of like 2-month restriction. They're like, we're not sending you money for like 7 to 8 weeks. And I was just like, oh, okay, what am I supposed to do? And at that point, productions had started shutting down. And so my work was gone. So it became, it's like, what do you do from here? I actually saw a way out. Thankfully, like our apartment, let us break our lease, and I moved back home. I moved back to Nashville. It was probably like the best thing that could have happened at the time, versus like falling and letting like the debt stack up and like pay back all this rent in this apartment. And I didn't like the apartment complex anyway, so that was the best thing they could have done for me. I was out. So they sent the email and said, "Hey, you guys can like leave and break your lease, no penalties." I was out. And so I was able to go back home and actually be with my family and actually take care of my family, because my mom and my aunt, they're older, and they're very susceptible to they were susceptible to that virus. And so I was able to like keep them at home and take care of them. So it was just all about survival, not just for myself, it was more so for my family than it was for myself.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting. We were close before, but we got really close during the pandemic. And later, Joe and I will share how we actually used Joe's experience of returning home. And we ended up pitching a comedy all around town based on that, or inspired partially by that. Alexandra, do you want to jump in and just tell us how you were kind of feeling? Because you had this whole institute, and was it primarily in person?
Was all in person. And I was a teacher. I was a professor for 10 years at local community colleges and universities. And then I took time off to have kids. I started the Institute around the same time, and we were all in person. I had a baby in November of 2019.
Oh, wow. And
we rented in a WeWork building. And we all know WeWork had its own little dramatic rise and fall. And so we had to pivot. I was supposed to come back from maternity leave March 15th, 2020. And it was the pandemic. The San Francisco shut down March 17th, 2020. So I never came back, and I had to pivot online in a weekend. Luckily, I taught online about 10 years ago, and I didn't like it because they didn't have Zoom then. It was, and I felt like it wasn't as personable, but we did it, and it was hard, but here we are.
Okay, and that leads me to, so lockdowns and restrictions force everybody pretty much around the world to adapt to their spaces and exist within the confines of four walls, basically, just kind of like what we're doing right now, which leads to my next question. Can you describe how your professional life was impacting when you were forced to work from home? Basically, just walk us through what you needed to do that within your own home. Because I know, for example, Joe, you stand up and you have a stand-up desk and the whole kind of setup. Just tell us what it's like.
So when I moved back to Nashville, it was very difficult. Like, I'm here in my home in LA now, so I have a home office, but there's peace and quiet here. When I moved back home to Nashville, it was not the same. I went back to my family home that was owned by myself, my mother, and my aunt. But my aunt's son had moved in with them, along with his wife and two kids. So you can imagine that house was just nothing. It was everything but quiet at the time. Yeah. As soon as I got back to Nashville, like not even 2 weeks after I got offered a job in the writer's room for The Resident, Fox. And I was just like, oh, am I going to have to move back to LA? But they're like, we're remote, you're good. I was like, okay, great. So I'm working from home. I'm working from like my bedroom, because I have the master bedroom and had enough space to put a desk in. But there were times and days where the two kids at the time, I think they were maybe 2 and 4, around that. So you can already imagine there were times I'd be in Zoom meetings like these talking, and then one of the kids set the bathroom on fire, and I was just like, excuse me, everyone. And I'll have to like take my screen off, run off, put out a fire, and then come back like, okay, as I was saying, it was not easy. So
and when you said put out a fire, they thought you meant metaphorical.
No, it was a literal fire.
Literal.
I want to say Alexandra was laughing at that, and she said, "Me too, me too." Yeah, because you have small children.
Oh yeah, yeah. I had a newborn and a 2-year-old when the pandemic started, and then you can imagine and a lot of Zoom bombing in our household. It's just all the time. Like when my kids are home and they see Zoom, they think it's like fun for them because they started preschool on Zoom.
Yeah. So, Camille, what was your, how was it like to work from home? What did you experience? I know you talked a little bit about, of course, isolation.
Yeah. Well, something else came up to me too. So obviously I needed to get a safe space, and it was crazy because I was renovating at that time. So I had a Zoom background. I became very familiar with how to create a virtual background. And there were boxes, there was all this stuff going on, and I had to move out of my house. And no one, my students, because I had students at the time, had no idea what was going on, but because I always had a cute Zoom background. But I also want to touch on something professionally that was very at the forefront of my mind that I had to deal with. As the co-writer of the Clark Sisters, it was releasing April the 11th, 2020.
Wow.
So leading up to the pandemic, as the writer, doing the PR, I had planned an in-person screening. And I was renting out Raleigh, a screening room at Raleigh Studios, had gotten the catering, had invited like 150 people,
Wow.
and all of a sudden found out no one can do anything in person. And that shocked my world. And Michelle, you were a part of it. I had to pivot, and similar to how we're doing this seminar here and it's live streaming, I ended up doing sort of a live streaming pre-party and had some guest panelists and live streamed. I had never really done all of that before, but I wanted some kind of interactive experience to promote the movie that I co-wrote. So I had to pivot completely to that. But I want to talk about a God shot that happened, because I don't know if it's because a lot of people were at home or not, but the Clark Sisters came on Lifetime, and it had such high ratings. And I don't know if that was because of the pandemic. So it's so strange how things can happen that seem to derail our plans. But during that time, whatever it was, we had 2.7 million viewers, and it was the highest ratings that Lifetime had for a made-for-TV movie in 4 years. So I don't know, maybe that was a part of it, but.
No, I totally agree. I was going to say, during the pandemic, first of all, we all watched a lot of TV, right? We were home. We couldn't go to the movies. We couldn't go outside for the most part. So, but I will also add, the Clark Sisters are very beloved in the Black community, especially. And like my mother was like, "Ooh, girl, that Lifetime movie is so good," right? It's like, and I think word of mouth too helped to really spread the word, because what were we constantly saying? What y'all watching? What's on?
Yeah.
But you bring up a really good point, Camille, which leads me to, let's talk about some of the projects that we worked on during the pandemic, and specifically how those projects either came to be or how we developed them. I know that I had mentioned that Joe and I ended up working on a project. So I'd love for Joe to just kind of dive in and talk a little bit about that project. Yeah.
Well, first of all, you forced me into this project.
I did. I am not ashamed.
Definitely forced me into this project. Michelle had been back and forth about an idea, and I was like, "Oh, that sounds really fun. You can do this, you can do that." You know how you help your friends, you talk to your friends about a project they have, and when it really speaks out to you, you're like, "Oh, you're just kind of like bouncing ideas." So I looked up, she's like, "Okay, great, so we're doing this," and I was just like, "Who's we? We who?"
Me, you, me, and you, me, you.
And
Yo,
next thing you know, I look up, and again, we're bouncing ideas back and forth, and next thing I look up, we have meetings set up with CBS Studios, and I was just like, "Wait a minute, I was not ready for this." But we ended up developing this really fun project. Are we talking the name?
Yeah, we can talk about it.
Sugar Mamas, which we were pitching as the Black Golden Girls, and it was so much fun to put together.
So much fun.
As Michelle mentioned, like me going home sort of influenced one of the main character storylines, because it's like you're putting down your career, and like it's almost in a sense of starting over, because you're going home and people are questioning, like, "Why are you home? Like, you've been gone for so long. What happened? What brought you back?" And that was one of the biggest selling points of our project. Like Michelle said, we were pitching all over town. It happened so quickly. I think that's one thing about this pandemic. The pandemic happened so fast, and everything else that came with it happened so fast, because
I agree.
I wasn't expecting to go back to work so quickly, like less than 2 weeks after selling everything, having to move back across the country. Definitely wasn't expecting a few months later to be pitching a project with Michelle and like doing Zoom pitches, because this is like my first time pitching to a major, like a big project like this. And normally you think you're going to be in a room across, a table from some suits and this table all just in squares. So that was a lot, something to get used to. But it was fun.
No, it was. And I wanted to just share with the guests a little bit more info. First of all, because, you know, a lot of times like we're here like, oh, don't talk about it, you jinx it. I rebuke that. I don't believe that. I do believe in like speaking things into existence and also just sharing about the projects that we work on, because one, I think it's helpful to get a sense of maybe kind of what's out there or what people are, you know, working on or trying to sell. So when Joe and I started developing this idea, I already had this idea about these older Black women in a show. And I knew that Joe had this great relationship with his mom and his auntie. And I was like, ooh, we should put something together and create this idea together. And I already had a relationship with CBS because they are still currently my studio partner on another project. So I just went back to them. And so here's a tip for everyone. When you're building relationships with studios, networks, or a particular set of producers, you go back to them, right? People want to work with people that they already know, that they already like. And so because my relationship with CBS Studios is very solid, I just went back and said, hey, I got this idea. I want to bring in Joe, and we ended up pitching to CBS and they loved it. And they actually gave us like a deal where they came on to be our studio partner, but then we still had to find distribution basically. Like that's what a lot of people may not understand. You can have a great idea. You can have a studio attached. We had a showrunner attached. We were discussing talent, but ultimately, if you don't get a buyer, then you still don't get your project made. And it has nothing to do with you, how great the project was. It's sometimes it's just timing. And we were in the middle of a pandemic. And so we were trying to get that project sold. And as we left 2020, we had everything set up in place. But then once the new year started, things did kind of fall apart. We're still committed to the project. And it's something that, because it's based on our grandmas and our moms and our aunts, we're not going to give up on it. We just know we have to put it on the shelf for now, which is another tip. Don't give up on your projects. Just move on to the next one and just figure I'll come back. I love to tell my students the story of Queen's Gambit. It took 32 years for Queen's Gambit to become the series that we all fell in love with, that we watched during the pandemic on Netflix, right? So what project do you have that you're going to wait 32 years for? That's what I want you to think about. And so Camille, you want to talk a little bit about any other projects or maybe something that was inspired during the pandemic?
Yeah, I do also want to say that I mentioned the Clark sisters did not manifest. It aired during the pandemic, but it took 15 years for that project to make it to the screen from the time that we wrote the first treatment. So
Wow.
this is
Incredible.
definitely a marathon, not a sprint. And things can happen where there's maybe a start where you seem to almost sell it and it doesn't. Just remember that maybe because it doesn't happen at that time doesn't mean the project can't come back around. I've had
Oh,
so many
totally.
different projects that I had to put back on the shelf for just a minute, but several years later, the topic became relevant, or a certain actor that was right for it could get attached, and all of a sudden the wheels started turning. So we have to definitely think with that mindset. It may just be a not now and not a no or never. But one thing that also happened with me, I'm represented by Entertainment 360 and have a great team of managers who I love. And during that time, I had just actually signed with them because of the success coming out of the Clark sisters. It was a really great time. I got this new management team and we were setting up lots of Zoom meetings. So that was the reality. Like we are now, this is the new normal. But at that time, it was like, okay, you're going to be doing all of your meetings on Zoom. And I was doing general meetings. I was doing open writing assignment meetings, and it was trial and error. And I had to learn a few tips. And so some of the things, as you guys can see now, it's probably, don't at me, but as you can see, I'm emoting, my hands are kind of moving, I'm looking at the camera. But I kind of had to learn things to where it felt like I was actually in a room with someone, you know. And one of the things that I practiced was, I know this is going to sound really weird, but the little green light, you know, where the camera is, sometimes on Zoom, we could be looking down or reading something, or maybe thinking nobody's looking or looking that way. And I had to realize, you know, because my managers were setting up all these meetings, how can it feel like I'm present with someone when I am doing these meetings, that they really get to know me and they feel like they're having a connection with me? So that was one tip that became really important which was I'm not able to meet with these people in person, where you get to feel somebody's energy and feel their vibe, but I still have to try to create that same space or that same feeling, even though we're doing it on Zoom and doing it over camera. I was really fortunate with that process to sell a project to Stars, and it took a lot of practice for me when I sell projects, and this is the project that I mentioned with 50 Cent as my executive producer, and he had a deal at Stars at that point, and my project is still at Stars. But I write a script, and so everything I had was scripted out, but I practice it as an actor because I come from an acting background, and that I am totally ready to go off script when I'm actually doing the pitch. So that was the process. And I did that for every single meeting that I did. I always had a script or an outline, and my goal was to practice enough and rehearse it so that I would be off script and really be able to be fully present and not be looking at a piece of paper or looking at flashcards or what have you when I was actually having those meetings.
Yeah, I want to jump in and say, but everybody cannot remember like how to do it in that way, which is a particular way. So one of the things that I do, and I know Joe and I, we did this as well, we would have our pitch up on the computer. Like right now, I have a document up and I'm bullet pointed, and I'm not just freestyling this with y'all. I'm not that good.
Yeah.
So it's guiding me. And so you can have your notes up in Zoom, which is something that when you're in a face-to-face meeting, you can have notes too, but it's a little bit more obvious, right? So you can have your notes up and then you kind of scroll. But I love what, CAMILLE was saying, like you're in this space and you get to be a little dramatic, right? Joe and I, we had a whole shtick. We were like going back and forth. Everybody was laughing at our pitch. Also, here's another tip. If you're pitching a comedy, it better be funny. You better be funny. And that's why I wanted Joe, because Joe is really funny, even though he says he's not. He's one of my funniest friends. And so part of it is having people see, even his expressions are funny. I'm telling you, we did voices in our pitch. We were like we had so much fun. Because again, you're in this space and you're pretty much alone, right? In your whatever room you're in, and you're trying to connect with these people in their spaces. And they are distracted. Like Alexandra said, you have babies and they have lives going on. And one time I was in a pitch and somebody's cat just walked across the screen.
It is always a cat. It is always a cat.
The cat's like, what y'all doing? Yeah, but I think it's so important to understand that it's really about reimagining the space that we're in. Because here's what's important. We're going to talk about this more in detail. We're still pitching on Zoom. I mean, yes, we are currently in a strike. Yeah. That's very important. We can talk a little bit about that. But ultimately, I have not since 2020 been in person to pitch anything. And I have pitched to ABC, NBC, CBS, Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, Stars. I've pitched all over this town, and I'm still doing it in these boxes.
Yeah.
So we think that these boxes are going to stick around for a while. And so even though the pandemic created this new way of doing business, it appears as if we can. And let's talk a bit. Why do you think that is? Like, why are we still in the boxes, Joe?
It's convenient.
It's convenient. Yes.
Travel time.
You
don't have to drive an hour. Sorry, Joe.
No, you're right though. And that's the thing. I also think, and someone in the chat just said it's cost effective. That as well, because I'm not close to LA, anymore. So for me to get in my car and drive to Studio City, it's gonna take me at least an hour. Who's got time for that? Who has time, gas, anything? Yeah. Everybody got time for that. Exactly. So it's more convenient to hop on a Zoom, do a meeting. And as CAMILLE said, talking about the green dot on your webcam, it's like my camera's right here. And I really appreciate what you said, because you do have to make a practice as far as I'm looking into the camera now. Yes. And this is how it talks to you directly. Sometimes when it's more informal, I'm looking at the squares, so you can see my eye lines divert a little bit. But sometimes when you really want to drive a specific point home, I've made it a point to practice looking dead into the camera to make sure, even if I'm not looking at you in person, you feel my eye contact and you feel how serious I am about it. Right. And I want to say one quick tip. I learned this from my good friend, Deb Glenn.
put a Post-it near the camera. Don't cover the camera, but put a Post-it that says, look here, smile, whatever little information you need to tell yourself. So it forces your eye up, because you don't want to do this. So you want to do this. And also you should be practicing when you're pitching in these spaces with your friends and people who can tell you the truth, right? It's like, I was told to smile a little bit more, or be, like, present.
You gotta remind yourself to take a breath. Like you have notes for yourself in your pitch. It's like, take a breath, Michelle. And that's smart.
Yeah.
Like, you really have to remind yourself to do that, and like put notes in there for yourself.
I would actually be like, slow, listen, we all grown. I'd be like, slow the fuck down. Because I was going so fast, like,
I do want to say something, because I want to make sure I represent what I was actually doing. Even though I said I went off script, like you, I did have my document up. I had a cheat sheet with bullet points, but good. I was able to, if I needed to look back at my bullet points to get back on whatever I was saying to stay with my pitch. So that's one thing you can do that you can't really do in person. No one can see your notes. Yeah, it's seamless. They wouldn't even know that I was looking back to remember, oh, go to this next thing. But I also, a friend and a few friends there's teleprompter apps as well now that people are using.
Yeah, I heard about
I think that. Somehow I've never gotten into that group, but that scroll whatever you have while you're on your computer or on your iPad or phone. So I know a few friends that were using the teleprompter apps.
Yeah. Now, Bashir, who wasn't able to make it today, I know he would do the teleprompter ads. And I wanted to just chime in and say, well, before I dive in, I actually want to go to Alexandra, because you started this entire program during the pandemic. Can you just talk a little bit about like the thought process behind it and what you needed to do to get it to happen?
Oh, okay. Well, I started it as a blog. So I was a blogger in the early days of blogging, and I stopped because I just didn't think I needed to put my blog out there anymore. I don't know why, just blogs went out of style for me. I stopped doing it. And then I kept thinking, like, this is going to change everything. And I have to get back into the world after having my second kid. And I feel like stress or the anxiety of, this is the world closing for me, opportunities in my career. Is the pandemic too much? So I just started a blog again, and I registered the domain. No one had it. And I called it Dispatches from Quarantine. I started it in March. I registered it in March, and I started my first blog post April 1st. And I just wrote about, what it was like, and sort of freaking out in the middle of the night, what the grocery store, I took pictures of the grocery store and myself hoarding, and then
it was you buying all the toilet paper, huh?
It's me. Yeah, I never read that. Sorry. But and then it became I just started, other people said, oh, can I send something to you? Other writers of the Creative Writing Institute. And then I said, okay, so it was a lot of poets. And then we had many submissions, and our secret is we published everybody except for anything that's like really weird or something. Like, even weird stuff we publish, whatever, as long as it has to be relevant to the topic, and we published it. And we worked with people. I worked with a lady whose short story wasn't ready yet, just to get it ready to publish it. And it was her first short story, just for free, and then the Institute needed money. We've had a lot of, like pivots. It's been a lot. It's hard to run a small arts-based nonprofit in San Francisco, which has its own pandemic story. It hasn't come back yet, like other cities. And I tried to apply for grants. So I decided, well, what could I get a grant for? What would be interesting? Maybe what do I do that's interesting that could get a grant, an arts grant? And then we thought about, well, maybe Dispatches from Quarantine could be a performance series, since performers get a lot of grants for like poetry, spoken word, that kind of thing. Because we had one performance with the public library and Zoom with all these and from that performance, 4 people became poet laureate of their city.
Wow.
Poets. It was amazing. And then that's when we got the idea. So the first event we had was poets. And then we just thought, well, why don't we do different genres and think about how did COVID-19 change our reality, and hear from and bring in, because because I wasn't able to write during the pandemic as much as I wanted to, and I had, because of, you know, I had no childcare until my son was 3.5, and that was because there was no room in San Francisco, and pandemic, a lot of people moved, and then suddenly there's room, and I had to do something, so I used my space. I got invited to be an artist in residence at a local theater, Counterpulse Theater. And as my art, I said, okay, I'm going to bring in my teaching, and I'll hold this space for other people to be creative during this time, because I know how to do that. So that was the project, and that's what the Institute is. It's sort of holding that space.
No, I love that. And I really wanted you to share that because, you know, during that time, I felt like there was a lot of hopelessness. But to see what you did and accomplish during the pandemic, I think is really inspiring. You created a space basically for writers to come in and to stay connected. It's like what CAMILLE said. We do have a tendency as writers to be introverted or isolated, depending on especially how we write. And I think Zoom definitely made it worse for some of us. So these kinds of spaces are still important, I believe, because many of us still, unless we're again, we're on strike, so I can't even use that example. But when writers are in writers' rooms, then they're together. But even so, we still had quite a few writers' rooms that were still remote, right? And so I think that, again, these spaces become that much more important. So I want to dive into some of the technical aspects of pitching, because I'm sure some of you all may want to know, for example, you know, how we did it. And so I want to use this next portion to really dive into the components of, as CAMILLE calls it, a kick-ass pitch. What does a great pitch need, and especially on Zoom? So CAMILLE, I'd like for you to start.
Sure. I'm going to share a link too with everyone for a book that was written by a friend of mine called The Hollywood Pitch Bible. If anyone feels moved to get it, it's been helpful for me. I've also kind of condensed it, and I've shared it with my mentees and students. But one of the really important ingredients of a pitch, especially when you're on Zoom, is your personal connection. Every pitch, in the way that I was taught, starts with your personal connection. And I have found that sometimes that's the hardest element for us as writers, and also the theme and how that's connected to the story. So I'll give you an example of the particular project that I sold that I'm talking about. I'm from Compton, California, home of NWA, straight out of Compton. But my story is not going to be as bright as that. My neighbor died when I was like in my 20s, and she was murdered. And so the project that I sold is a crime drama. And I really started, and, you know, I mean, I know it's not capitalizing off of my pain or, you know, anything like that, but it gave the authenticity when I started my pitch to say, like, I'm from Compton, you know, getting all that out of the way, the fun part. But my neighbor died when I was in my 20s, and it turned out she was killed by a serial killer. So then everyone is like, oh, wow, this is something she really experienced. And then translating that to, I was not able to do anything to help her to solve the crime. And I created this badass female FBI profiler who solves the crime in this fictionalized version of the story. That immediately caught everyone's attention. But what I wanted to say was, it was really the personal connection that was so important. And part of our job as writers, and one of the hardest things is, for each different project, you've got to find out what that personal connection is. And I've sometimes had mentees or students who have been like, well, I like eating In-N-Out burgers, so hey, here's a story I'm going to do about. And that's like, that's not really a personal connection. It can't just be something that's kind of surfacey, or you're trying to make it happen and it's not really organic. You have to really find a place to where the buyer or the listener of the pitch is going to know that no one else can write this story but you. I mean, obviously somebody else could, but they have to believe that there's a deep connection with why you want to tell this story. One of the most important parts. I know I stayed on that one for a bit, but The personal connection then leads to the log line in the format. So this is a 1-hour crime drama. And the themes, the world, for me, what world are we going to live in? Then the characters that we're going to follow and be invested in. In the old days of TV, they used to say, you know, those 100 episodes, what characters are you going to want to follow and watch for 100 episodes? And then into the pilot and the season arc, the first season arc, and kind of touching on possibly what could be 3 seasons. This is for a TV series, obviously. It's a little bit different for a feature, but those are the components of the strong pitches that I have given and the pitches that I have sold or gotten as writing assignments. I hope I didn't miss anything.
No,
Anybody want to add to that, or maybe you kind of do it
Yeah.
a slightly different way?
No, that's exactly what I do as well. It doesn't matter the project. During the pandemic, I was working on multiple projects. I had so many projects that sometimes it was a little bit overwhelming. And
You own half Hollywood. You own half Hollywood.
One of the things that was really interesting when CAMILLE mentioned, you know, we don't have to drive, I think what happened with the studios and networks, they were able to have more meetings because they didn't have to have the kind of, we have to get there, whatever, I don't know. And their execs were also, you know, from home. So everybody was home and we just had like back-to-back meetings. For example, so I want to go deeper into what CAMILLE talked about. I was pitching a big action series with a team that I met during the pandemic. And that's another thing, like, even though we were all in our homes, we were still making really incredible connections through social media. I helped to really put Hollywood on blast when George Floyd was killed by penning a letter called Dear Hollywood. That letter went viral and I was like on the news and I had a lot of press around it, and the committee that I represented, which is the Committee of Black Writers. And so I was able to get a lot of meetings around town. And sometimes I was called in on a project and I was like, what? So one of the projects was an action movie. Now I love action. Let me just be very clear. But when the project came to me, it already had a lot of development. And so the only way you should take a project is that you see your way into the project. But what I loved about this project is it has a woman as the lead, right? And so, okay, I'm a woman, and she really cares about the world and wanting to make it a better place. Now, she happens to be a soldier, which I am not. So that's where your research can come in. I have a friend who I went to high school with. He served to the highest degree of, you know, within the military, but he also has really bad PTSD, which he's very vocal about. And he talks about, you know, getting the help that he needs. And this character had that in the storyline. It was already developed in there. So I was like, okay. So I spent a lot of time talking with him. He shared with me so many like personal things. He also let me know as a soldier, you know, he loved it being in battle. And I had to really shift the mindset to really work and develop this. So we ended up taking that project out to everyone. But I'm gonna tell you, sometimes you are heartbroken because we worked on that project for like, we started in 2020. And I think, I wanna say it went up to just the end of last year where we were just like, And I think sometimes the project is great, but it's just people can't handle the subject matter, right? We wanted to basically look at sex trafficking, but how it impacted girls and women of color, which is actually the primary victims of sex trafficking. So you have a movie like Taken, where you have, you know, this white character and a white daughter, and they deal with it, but in a very almost superficial kind of way. But also that's not the norm. The norm is not some wealthy or, you know, well-to-do white girl. It's often going to be poor Black and brown women and girls who are very, very vulnerable. And so this character, she's trying to rescue her niece who's been kidnapped by this sex trafficker. And that to me felt very personal in the way that CAMILLE talked about her story as a Black woman. If I had the abilities to go kick everybody's ass and go save the world of every little Black and brown girl who's been taken, I would. So I went into that project with that kind of a mindset of like wanting to be a hero. Like we all want to be heroes, but I think we might have a very specific idea of what a hero could look like for us. And for me, I would want to save us, right? So that pitch went out and we went all around, but nobody wanted to touch sex trafficking, which is interesting because they actually deal with sex trafficking and taken. But for whatever reason, nobody wanted to see little Black and brown girls be saved. And that did piss me off. I'm not going to lie. Like every project you work on, you're not going to walk away and feel like, oh, well, you're going to be like, oh, it's so frustrating. So much so that halfway through us taking the project out, we pivoted. I then ended up doing a new version of the same soldier and took her to Africa, where there's a lot of turmoil, specifically because a lot of terrorism is moved to Africa, and the Africans are being used in this effort. And so then I was like, okay, we're going to shift. We're going to go out and present this new idea. And then the notes we got was nobody really wants to focus on terrorism anymore. And I'm just like, so that project is also on the shelf. It's something that, again, I was brought in, so it's a little different. But then I also had some fun projects. I pitched a project with my good friend, Dia Lewis out of Chicago, about a Black family who is, their lives are upended because their parents announced they're getting a divorce. We were looking at this idea of this very like united Black family, and they've been like, the parents have been married for like 40 years. Because I was reading that divorces were happening in couples that have been married like 25 years or more. And I was like, whoa, that's interesting. And like, what if your parents are married your whole life and all of a sudden they divorce, and how that could tear a family apart? Adult children of divorce actually suffer sometimes more than children do, because you're so used to your parents being together. So we put together this incredible pitch and we took it out. And we didn't, get a sale because we were told during the pandemic, people wanted stars attached or they wanted attachment. And so that's another project that we put on the shelf. And then one of the other projects that I spent a lot of time on was a sci-fi, because again, we're not a monolith. Like we write all kinds of projects, but like Camille said, you find your way into that story. So for me, this sci-fi was so important because when I first moved to LA, I was living in Westwood, the Westwood area, because I went to UCLA. And then once I graduated, they kick you out. And then I was like, where shall I live? And I was like, where do Black people live? Because I was like, where my community? And so people were like, oh, you can go to Inglewood. And I was like, okay. So I moved to Inglewood and I absolutely loved it. But I remembered wondering why there were oil fields in Inglewood. Like, what is this? What are they digging for here? And is that safe? And so I began this idea and this thought of how companies come into Black communities, Black, brown, and poor communities, especially, and they put they put toxic chemicals into the community, or they drill and they create problems. And I learned that when I was there with my family, there was a huge oil spill. They didn't even tell us about it, much less like provide like services. So Bashir and I, who's not here today, we put together this incredible sci-fi about a company that pretty much creates this horrific earthquake in Inglewood, California, and unleashes a monster. And we got that set up at CBS Studios. Again, I go back to my same studio partners all the time. And we took that all around town. And can I tell you, that was probably one of the most frustrating projects because it was so good, so developed, and we were so excited, but we kept getting compared to Stranger Things. We are nothing like Stranger Things, right? And that's what's frustrating. I'm like, Stranger Things, and our project is very centered on Black, brown experience. And we were like, there's one Black boy on Stranger Things and his little sister, and they weren't even really developed as Black. He just happened to be Black, but he wasn't developed out as Black. And this is really looking at race and specifically environmental racism, right? Where companies come into our communities, but it's still done as like a very exciting sci-fi. Also at the time, the La Brea Tar Pits, was it La Brea, about the sci-fi one, I think it's NBC, came out. So that's another thing. Sometimes you come up with a project, everybody's excited, but then it still has to be compared to something else. And that part can be frustrating. So I just wanted to share with you, like during the pandemic, I was working on a lot of projects, that have still not manifested, but I still believe that they can and will eventually one day. It's just a matter of how passionate, we are about these projects and keeping them moving forward. Just like Joe and I with Sugar Mamas, we just know one day we will get it made. And by the time we were saying just the other day, yeah, but when we get it made, they're going to have to add some more zeros to that check because we'll just be much more established when we go out. Okay. So anyway, just had to get all that out there because it was a lot happening during the pandemic. And I often say, when we're sharing on social media, people only see a small percentage of what we're actually doing, right? We post our cute selfies, we delete the ugly ones. It's like, ooh, that angle's not my best. But a lot of us in this business, we are working so hard. It's not for lack of trying. It is just the industry develops way more than they actually put out, right? And we're all back here. And I want to say, somebody asked about getting paid. You do not get paid in development until you get the deal, like CAMILLE mentioned.
Yeah.
So you can develop for 1, 2, 3 or more years and not make a penny as a writer. It's partly why we're on strike. We want there to be money for development. Like we also want to be compensated for all the work we do. Like CAMILLE said, we're developing whole projects. We're not just going in and like, yeah, by my show, here's the log line. We're developing oftentimes the first full episode and season, and we might even develop out seasons depending on what we're being asked. And that's a lot of work and a lot of time and energy and dedication to not be compensated at all until you actually get the sale. So again, let me go back. When I sold my first project in 2019 to CBS Network, yes, we got paid for that to write the script. So what you're really trying to do is get paid to write the actual script. Okay, so my partner, Ali Leroy, and I, at the time, we got paid to write it. We then resold it in 2020 to BET, and we got paid again to write it for the BET network. Right before the strike, we actually bought the show back from BET. So now we're back with the studio, but we don't have a buyer, but we still have the deal set up with CBS. Okay, so basically when you have a studio, they write the checks. They pay you according to the deals that are set up with the buyer. So as long as you still have your you still have your studio attached, you can still keep moving forward, even if a buyer leaves or passes, if the studio is still clear about their intentions with you. And one of the things that I always do, I keep a good relationship with my studio partners, meaning the executive. They're just people. And just find the 1 or 2 execs that you really like. You don't have to fake it. I love my executive over at CBS. Her name is Marissa Brooks. I'm sure she wouldn't mind saying that. She's an amazing exec because we get such bad reputations where we hear, oh, the execs are terrible. No, she's amazing. She's supportive. And I will argue she is the reason why I still have my deal at CBS, because she believes in me and she believes in the project. So part of it really is about nurturing the relationships. Like try to go in not so adversarial. I feel like we go in sometimes like, yeah, they're going to try to change my stuff. They might. And sometimes it's actually pretty good. Some of the suggestions are not terrible, right? Some of them are, and we're going to talk about that. But a lot of times they're just trying to also get your project made, right? It's so many things that will prevent it from getting made. It's so difficult to get made that you need your allies. You need people that you can call, that you can lean on, who can also keep you going when times get really, really hard. So to answer the question, you don't get paid until. So every other project I mentioned.
And there was something I wanted to just interject for some people who may not understand a picture of, because you said the word buyer a few times.
Okay.
And there's some people that may not know, or I was thinking like, if I didn't know that when she says buyer, she means the network. So, and it can be confusing because CBS has CBS Studios,
yes,
but then there's also CBS, the network. So because she had CBS, the production company or the studio as her production company, didn't mean that it sold to CBS, the network. So I wanted to clarify for that.
So let me be clear. So, right, and that's a good point. So it did first sell to the network, and then they opted not to pick it up to series. But because the studio was also CBS, they were like, okay, they didn't buy it. We're going to take it to another buyer. That's why sometimes you'll see a show like a CBS Studios production could be on NBC or ABC or Stars. They can go anywhere. So some creators like to actually go to studios, because then you have your, basically you have your money people, and you have the company that's going to actually pay for your show. Other times you'll have a studio network that'll be one. Here's the interesting part about that. If the studio and network are one and they pass, it's over. It's a wrap, right? But if it's a studio and a network or buyer, and they're separate, and the studio still believes in the project, they can just take it to another buyer, which is done a lot, which is what we're going to do again with the Honorable, which is take it to another buyer. So it's just something to think about. I know that was a lot of information, and I want to make sure that I get through the rest of our questions, but Joe, did you want to add in anything? Because I said a lot.
Yeah, what else is there to say?
Okay, so
Here's a tip based on a lot of what she said and what we were talking about. It could be good for you to go to Deadline or Hollywood Reporter or Variety and start to study who the studios are and who the networks are, so that you as a content creator and as a creator and writer understand how the inner workings of how this is. Because say in my case, my studio is Lionsgate, but they have a relationship at a first look with Starz Network. So Lionsgate and 50 Cent, with his deal at the time was with them, acquired the project first, and then we developed it, like Michelle said, and then I had to pitch it to Starz Network, and then Starz Network had to hire me to then write the script for the project.
Oh,
so
and I want to
Starz
give another
Network
example.
was the buyer that she was talking about. Sorry, Michelle.
Right. No, that was great, because we actually share a studio partner. I have another project set up with Lionsgate.
I told y'all, Michelle owns half Hollywood, y'all.
Not yet. I'm trying, but I have another project set up with Lionsgate, and that project I developed with Mary J. Blige's Blue Butterfly Productions and Jason Eganberg, who's the producer who brought me on. And let me talk about social media presence, why this is important. Jason reached out to me on social media, y'all. He slid into my DM, like, hey, and I was like, hey, who this man?
Who
This man.
But, and I almost seriously, y'all, just dismissed it. But something was like, no, because he wasn't talking shady, y'all. He was just like, hey, I'm very interested in possibly doing a project with you. And so I looked him up. Do your due diligence. I looked him up. He was legit. I was like, oh. And so I took a Zoom meeting with him, and he said, I have a project with Mary J. Blige. He had me at Mary J. Blige. Y'all do know that. She optioned a book, and she was looking for a writer who could take the book and develop it into something pretty special. So I pitched. And I will tell you something, bring your authentic self. You don't have to bring anything else but you to the table, because when I went into that pitch, y'all, I was like, I have nothing to lose. And I told them what I didn't like about that book, what I did like about the book, because I didn't care. I was like, if they're going to pick me, they're going to pick me. And before I got done, they were like, we love it. We love it. We want to work with you. So then we started developing the pitch. And that took a year, y'all. And I need you to understand it. Like, I'm working with the faith and the belief in the project that I'm going to work with this team. It's a great team. And I would like to, hopefully sell this show. Now, when we started, we didn't have a studio partner yet. It was Mary J. Blige, but she has a deal with Lionsgate. So it was natural that we would go to them. That's important. And she already has a show on Starz. So it was like, okay, we're going to go to Lionsgate. But then life happened. And at the end of 2021, my nephew died. And of course, I was devastated. He was only 24 years old. And during that time, it was a process. He was dying. It took a little bit of time. And in that time, I had to pitch my show to Lionsgate. And, I could have told them what was going on or opted not to. But you know what? It was the thing that kept me going, because I really believed in the project, and I needed something to distract me. So I remember going in and pitching the show, and either it was like it was probably like a day or two before he actually passed, but he was in hospice. And I remember pitching it, and I was like, if they like it, they like it. If they don't, I don't care. But I did come with the passion because I believe in the project. And they didn't get right back to us. And then my nephew passed, and we had the funeral. And then about a month later, they were like, oh, we're in. So then Lionsgate, once they came on as our producing partner, we knew we had to take it out to Starz. Thank you. And to everyone, you know, pretty much around town. And y'all, we knocked on every door. Stars was our first. They were like, nope. Now, and that's interesting because if you go to the studio that has the deal with the company and they say no, then you're like, okay, so, you know, you have to pick up your little stuff and take it to the next. But we must have gone out to maybe 10 companies. And our final meeting was with Lifetime. And I remember right before we went into the meeting, Mary J. Blige's president of her company, his name is Bruce. He was like, watch they buy it. And I was like, really? You think they're gonna buy it? And at first they actually came back with like, we're not so sure, because this is what happened. And again, in a spirit of transparency, I won't give names, but so when an exec meets with you to hear your story, a lot of times they have to take it back to the team, right? So we met with 2 executives and they loved it. But when they went to the team, they had a hard time re-pitching it to the team, or it didn't come across the way like I pitched it to them. So the team was like, we don't know. And they ultimately were like hemming and hawing. But then the producer I mentioned earlier, Jason, he got on the phone and he was like, nah, you got to do this project. And so you also want to work with people that are going to fight for you. So while we were waiting, Jason was on the phone, you know, people were making phone calls from like Mary's team, like they were really working behind the scenes to make it happen. And then Lionsgate finally came back and said, okay, we want to do the first season, which was huge because normally if you sell a show, if you're fortunate, you can get the pilot, but they do seasons at over at Lifetime. And then that we were all super excited, of course, and then the strike happened. So we've all been waiting patiently. Yeah. So just know, like, it's always something going on, but I'm really glad that CAMILLE took the time to explain it, because I know it can be, I think when you're in the business and you talk, people are like, what? But you're right. You got to clarify it and make sure you understand the different dynamics. But ultimately, my Lionsgate team, it's a totally new team from my CBS team. So the good thing about once you have teams, then you can start saying, who could I go back to? And I want Joe to talk a little bit about Lifetime and how that ultimately ended up leading to you getting your movie.
So I'm glad you said that, because I read a question in the chat and someone was asking about, like, for a newbie, you know, how do you join in? I know we're going to do a Q&A later, but I think it's going to tie into what you just asked. Mm-hmm. For a newbie, because for me, I'm probably still like, I'm not going to say I'm new. I mean, I've been in the industry for like 15 years, but I start off in set and work my way into the writing side of it. Relationships are so important. I think that's the most important thing. And I know you hear it all the time, but it really is a firsthand thing. You see guys I'm talking to you directly now. Relationships are so important. The reason why I was able to do the Sugar Moms with Michelle was because Michelle brought me in with her to her deal with CBS. Like, it wasn't a thing where I was like, let me make a phone call and I'm gonna get CBS on the line. It was Michelle that had already had her established relationship with CBS. Same thing with Lifetime. The movie I just did for BET came through my Lifetime connection, because I was already doing Lifetime movies. I was like UPM, I was producing these movies. So I met another producer who was doing Lifetime movies and then was setting up a deal with BET Plus, I should say. And so that's how it came to be, was the relationship aspect. And as Michelle said, like, you want to work with people that like you. That's also important. You want to work with people who like you, because you might be trying to work with someone who's not very fond of you or fond of your stories. And it's very important to have someone who's going to champion and fight for your stories to get made. But you also have to do the work. And excuse me, what that also means is, like, as CAMILLE was talking about, like, the pitch process, one thing that's very important is the engagement. You know, as we're talking about the Zoom meetings, like, we're on Zoom right now. There are only 5 cameras on out of 24 people. So what are the other 19 people doing? You know what I'm saying? Like, you could be sitting around, you could be watching TV, you could be like playing a game, you could be on your phone texting. And I think the most important thing about a pitch, especially in a Zoom, is the engagement. What are you doing to keep people looking at you, listening to you? I'm not asking y'all to see y'all's cameras on, by the way. Don't do that. I'm just saying, like, but it's like, what's the important thing? Like, I'm looking to the camera right now because I'm talking to you guys directly, and I want you guys to know how important this is. The engagement is so important, and keeping their attention, because there were times even like when Michelle and I were pitching our show, you could see, like, people are like looking off to the side, they're clicking and they're like doing stuff. And there are times where I actually want to stop my picture, like, I'm so sorry, am I holding you up in something? Because my time's as important as yours. Because I was working, I think I was on 2 shows at the time we were pitching
Yep.
Sugar Moms. I was working 2 shows at once. So I had to stop.
You were up to 3 shows at one point, Joe, remember?
I was doing 3 shows at one point, but at this, when we're doing Sugar Moms, I was doing 2. So that means I had to take the schedule for 2 different shows and fix that and like make it work so we can go and pitch to these networks. And so when I'm sitting there watching someone off to the side clicking the cat swinging from the ceiling fan, I'm like, I'm so sorry, do we need to reschedule this meeting? Like, what are you doing? So I think it's so important. And here's the thing, there are different ways you can make your pitch engaging. You can ask questions. That doesn't mean they have to answer, but ask a question, make them stop and think like, oh, like, how does that relate to your show? How does that relate to their lives? You know what I'm saying? Like, you want to bridge that gap.
Yeah.
But also
That's the we.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, you really want to make them see themselves. Try to make them see themselves in your project the way you see yourself in your project. But the relationship aspect is so important. Like when you're out there like shaking hands and making friends, don't just do it. Like, don't go out with the intention of trying to find someone to like attach yourself to. Like, you actually want a genuine relationship with someone. Like Michelle and I have been working together. Like, we started with Sugar Mamas, and now we have 2 more projects that we're doing together that we're going to have more than 2, probably, but just the 2 on the top of my mind, because I'm like, she's already plotting. I don't know which way she is, which way I'm pointing, but she's already plotting on me to like put me on more projects, which is fine because we enjoy working together. But this is a genuine relationship that Michelle and I have. You know what I mean? And like, and same with her. Like, when I have a project I'm going, I'm like, what's Michelle going to be doing? Because she knows I'm going to be writing episode 4 of any project that she's writing. You know what I'm saying? Like, I've already claimed episode 4. That's my number. So, so just to answer that question that came from the chat, I think that was a very important thing to like interject.
Yeah.
And
I'd love to add something to that too, even though I'm not a newbie and it's been a while. But I will say that one thing with students and mentees and just continuing to study the industry, if you just, graduated from college or your MFA program and you're starting off maybe as a PA or whatever that entry level position is, that is a hard place to figure out, how do I get from here, I'm doing something entry level, to where I am actually pitching to a studio and then a network. One of the things I think is really important and that I have just studied over time is getting some heat around your name that can start opening up opportunities. And a lot of people are doing that now. And I feel like I say it like a broken record, but through a lot of the writing contests, a lot of the fellowships or short films that are getting out there, if you're in that place where, hey, I just got into the industry, but I'm trying to get to where I can get some representation and or start pitching around, having your name associated with some short films that are on the film festival circuit, or having been a semi-finalist or finalist in a number of writing contests, starts to open up opportunities as well, I think. It can be hard, but I have seen that happen.
Yeah, and I know we're doing Q&A later, but someone did ask while we were talking, like, establishing a foundation, and that's very important. I think a foundation and a network are equally as important. I think like the friendship that Michelle and I have, that's our foundation. Like, we both know what we like. We both know what we like to work on. And you kind of don't want to like put yourself out there until you actually have something solid to present. And even if you don't have like a solid pilot or a solid feature, you just want something solid, like an outline. It can be just as solid as a script. A pitch document can be more solid, like the most solid piece you have if you get that opportunity to pitch it. So you do want to establish like a foundation. You want to establish yourself. Your name is what's going to carry you in this business. Your reputation. I agree. And it's all about first impressions. Like, people will give you a shot. My BET Plus movie was greenlit from someone who did not know me, like, who had not read my work. He did not vet me at all. Like, we had one quick lunch. He knew the work that I've been doing and was like, let's go. And that's just, and it doesn't happen that quickly for everyone. But I think because I was carrying myself the one was like, I know what I'm doing and I'm ready to do this. And I think I just projected that so well. He was like, all right, let's go, you know?
And also I want to add, once you got that opportunity, you handled your business. I think that's going to be important too. You'd be so surprised at how quickly people turn into divas. I call them big shows in a little tent, like people who get their first opportunity. And I don't know if it's self-sabotage or whatever, but then they end up blowing it. And it's like, do not blow the opportunity when you get it. When Joe got to direct that movie, I remember you going in, doing everything you needed to do. You didn't come in and make it worse. And I think you finished a little bit early, correct?
Finished early. I finished like I gave them a day. Well, no, I didn't say I gave them a day off. But like I did finish a day early for like holiday travel and stuff like that because it's near the holidays. So I know that's like a big thing, you know, for like people to go home during holidays. And I was just like, I could have done this in like another day less. Not bragging, but you know, it's one of those things like because of the experience that I already had working on set, I knew how to utilize my time, the schedule, like what I needed to cut, what needed to be done, so I can make sure I made my time, you know?
Well, I'll brag for you because I was very proud of how you handled it, because that's also how you get the next assignment. Because as soon as Joe finished his movie, so it was funny because when the movie aired, you know, when you have friends in the industry, right, you want to support their work, but sometimes you don't like their work. And so my cousin had watched his movie and she was like, "Oh, cousin, it's really good." And I was like, "Oh, thank you, Jesus." Because I didn't want to have to lie to him or be like, "I saw your little movie." Yeah. So I watched.
Like, oh, your baby's so cute. Like, look at your baby. Oh,
I was really proud of him, but also so much so, guess what I did? My producer, who I sold the PG County, the Mary J. Blige project with, I know that he has a deal with Lifetime. So of course I introduced Joe to him because I said, "Hey, you need to work with this director. He's really good." He was on budget. He was on time. And in fact, he came in a little bit early, which is always, you know, time is money, of course, in Hollywood. That said, it's really, you know, I teach my students, I do this workshopping. I do a networking workshop. And one of the things I teach them is that it's not who you know, it's who knows you. And when people know you and can speak to your character and your work ethic, 9 out of 10, that's how you end up getting, you know, the next big project or whatever. Speaking of, let's dive back in and talk a little bit about the process, Camille, of preparing for the pitch. And I just want to say this, Joe knows, first of all, I'm really bad. I forget the actual pitch days, the times. I'll be cooking breakfast. And the best part about working with Joe was he would be like, "Are you ready?"
I mean, there was one time, I'll share this quick story. We were getting ready to pitch to one of the networks and
it was a major network, right?
Yeah. And I was like, "Hey, like, how you feeling? You ready to go?" She's like, and Michelle's just like, "Yeah, like I'm good. Like I'm over here making breakfast, like I got my grits on and making some eggs." And I was like, "Okay." I was like, "How fast are you planning on eating that? You know we're on in 10 minutes. She's like, "What? 10 minutes?" You just hear all the pots and pans go clanking in the background. She's like, "Oh shit, I gotta get ready." And she just hangs up. And I was on the phone like, "Oh my God, it might just be me." So I was like, I'm gonna get my little blonde wig and cock it to the side and play both parts. I don't know what was about to happen, y'all. But anyway.
Yeah, no, it was truly funny. So I will say for me, before I go to Camille, my prep is I really have to be organized and keep up with my times. Also in Zoom, sometimes you make sure you check those time zones, because sometimes a company may be from the East Coast based, or whoever set the Zoom up, and you could get thrown off. And that's really, for me, I got really thrown off with times. And when that incident happened with Joe, again, it was a big meeting, y'all. And I was ready, but I thought it was a few hours later. So I was literally eating like grits and eggs. And Joe was like, "You better go get you a Pop-Tart." So Camille.
Yeah, you better get a Pop-Tart. I'm going to try to answer 2 questions because someone wrote, "Would you recommend a newbie establish a foundation before utilizing their
Oh,
network?"
and let me say this, in 10 minutes, we're going to go to all the questions. So let's try to keep
Yeah.
And at 1:30. Yeah.
And that was the question I was answering earlier when I was talking about the relationships, the newbie
Okay.
section.
Yeah, I had something to add to that, but I'll go straight to the prepping. As Michelle said, first of all, you know, I put all mine in my calendar. I just calendar stuff right away. I'm so grateful because my manager's assistant will email me the night before and just be like, "Just a reminder, you have this meeting." But definitely my calendar with my reminders. But someone said to me, and one of my mentees is on here and she can attest to that, even though her camera's off, she'll get a laugh. I said, you have to pitch your pitch 10 times at least. Maybe not at most, but at least you need to run through it at least 10 times before you actually pitch it. One of the tools that I learned during the pandemic was the record function that we have on here. You can actually turn your Zoom on, put it on record, and you can actually pitch to your Zoom camera with nobody else on Zoom, and that could be your practice, and you can record it too. And the thing that helps with that, remember when I talked about looking at the little green dot or looking at the camera? You can then look back at it, the recording, to see, were you looking into the camera? Were you emoting? Were you saying a lot? Or what was happening when you were doing the pitch? And it's great because you're going to be pitching on Zoom, because now where that's the new normal, but you can use the record function to see how you're showing up in the pitch. And you can do it with a friend on who will then give you feedback, and you can then watch back the recording, or you can just do it by yourself. We used to pitch in front of the mirror. You can do that as well. But since you will be pitching more than likely on Zoom, it's a great way. So I would say for me, I would at least do 10 Zoom practices, recording it on Zoom with my camera on, with the recording on, before I would actually pitch. And that's how I would get close to off script. Because at first I was on script, but then I kept doing it and kept doing it and kept doing it. And I would have my writer's assistant give me feedback and keep pitching.
Yes.
That's one way I would prepare.
Also, and that's a great way too. I've done that. And when you have your teams, like my projects were set up with studios and other people, you pitch to them too. Joe and I know we must have pitched to CBS so many times, we got sick of it. But you're correct. You're constantly pitching. You have to practice. That's the thing. So that when you are in the actual pitch, it does feel natural. Yes, you're going to have your notes to keep you on track, but you still want it to feel very conversational, like you're telling a great story to a friend, like, oh, let me tell you what happened the other day, right? It's that idea, but it's more formalized in that you're saying, have you ever wondered what it was like to lose your parents? Like, and it is a bit dramatic. So those of you that are, have the inner little like actor in you, like it's the time to bring it out, because yes, we are writers and oftentimes, again, introverted or can be. This is a moment to bring out all those little characters that are in your head. Like I said, Joe and I, we would actually do the voices, right? We're like, blah, blah, blah. No, you didn't. Yes, you did. Da, 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 da. And we just had a lot of fun with it as well. So cannot emphasize enough the importance of practice, 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 and also get you some people that's going to tell you the truth. Don't have somebody like, oh, girl, I like it. I see Darshell like, Get people that say, listen, you're looking down too much. You're going too fast. You're not looking, make sure. And also when you're pitching, there are times you need to, sometimes silence is enough to then make people really lean in like, ooh, right? I had a pitch that I got to do also during the pandemic. And to show you how relationships work, when I moved to LA, I went to UCLA. My first internship was for Will Smith's Overbrick Entertainment. While I was there, I met an assistant named Jamal. We became really good friends and just stayed in touch over the years. Jamal is now vice president at Monkey Paw, which is, of course, Jordan Peele's company. And so he reached out to me about coming in to pitch a Candyman movie, because I'm from Chicago. So it was like, okay. And so I remember so one of the things I did was, I created a graphics this time because I was like, you know what, I'm in this Zoom space. Let me now give them a visual aid. So I reached out to an artist friend and we created this graphic. I'll see if I can find it, but it was a lot of fun because as I was pitching this idea of Candyman, although I moved him from Chicago, y'all, because he's an entity. I was like, he dead. He don't have to just live in Chicago, right? He can kind of live anywhere. But I also gave a visual aid. And even though I have never done like a full visual like pitch deck or pitch book on Zoom, I am seeing where in some projects now we are including some visual aids to just, I think people are getting a little Zoom fatigued. And also now we're starting to think about how we can be creative in our process. And so part of it is when I pitched PG County, I did use visual aids because I had so many characters in the show that I wanted to give you some visuals to connect with who is who. So then you could be like, oh, that's Taraji P. Henson. That's, Sanaa Lathan. These are, of course, actors that I would hypothetically like to have in the show. But it connects it. So yeah. Anything
Can I
else?
just add that every pitch that I've sold recently, I've used the visual aid. It's been integrated using in slides.
Yeah.
So that is that is something that's being done a lot now. Now that we've evolved in Zoom pitching, you don't necessarily have to, because again, as we said before, the people connecting to you is very strong and very important and powerful. But just know that a lot of people are using slides for, if not all, some portion of their pitches now.
Right. Okay. I was going to share my screen and see if can you all see this?
Yep.
Okay. So this was a poster that I had made for Candyman, my pitch. And it was this idea of, you would, instead of you calling, because the whole story with Candyman, right, is you say his name 3 times. I still won't say it 3 times, just so you know. And then he's going to come and like snatch your soul. So in this image, it's this idea of Candyman is actually pulling you into the mirror this time. Instead of coming out of the mirror, you get to enter into his world. And I wanted to give them the visual, and it took a lot. Luckily, I worked with the artist who did it for me just as a favor. But this is an example of something that you could do. So I didn't do like a full deck, but I did give at the end this image of like the hook. And you can tell, of course, from this that the lead, I hope you can, it's a Black woman, right? So that was me just saying like, okay, let me do a little bit of extra and just see, how it turns out. They did not go with my idea, but I still had a lot of fun, and it did encourage me to continue on with a few other horror film ideas that I have. And I had a lot of fun making the poster. I still actually have that hand, because believe it or not, we purchased the hand from like Amazon so he could use it to kind of recreate it. And it was cheap, it looked cheap.
Yeah.
But it was still a lot of fun, is my point. And I think the process is looking at each individual project and saying, what can I do to make myself stand out? And more importantly, I still have a relationship with Jamal. He's still my friend. And I'm certain, I could go back in the future with something else. Or, maybe Candyman again, if, they rethink it, or maybe they come back and say, we thought about it and we kind of like what you came up with.
Yeah.
Joe, do you want to dive in about your process? I know you have to like go to the beauty shop, right?
I think coming from like, it depends on what kind of person you are, because there are a lot of people who may have, I won't say stage fright. I grew up doing community theater, and I think one thing that really helped me is like, you have to get out of your head. I think that's one thing that people need to hear, is you really have to get out of your head and not think about it too much. And I know it's easier said than done, but once you practice it enough, it almost becomes second nature to you. And you don't want to focus so hard on getting it just right. Because if you make a mistake, you just go back and just repeat yourself. I saw someone in the chat saying they're the king of ums. And one thing that I do when I coach other people when they're public speaking, say the ums in your head. Now I'll let ums slip, but if you're like really doing a formal thing, say the ums in your head. Take a pause and catch yourself. People will respect that. Versus just stammering like, you know what I'm saying? Like, just take a minute, and they'll recognize it, because we all have to do it. I've had to do it. I've done it today. See, there it is. I didn't say it in my head though. But take that time to get out of your head, get familiar with it. There, I did it right there. So that's more so my process.
Mm-hmm.
Just don't take it, it's a serious matter, but don't take it so serious where you can't enjoy it.
I think I love what you said, Joe. And even if you don't come from an acting background, we are creatives, and we are moving in a space where we collaborate. Our hope is we're collaborating all the time with writers, directors, producers, and actors, and other crew members that make a film or TV project happen. When one is pitching, you have to, I'm suggesting that you think, you know what, I have to put on my actor's hat. And it will really help if you think, you know what, I'm acting a role now. So if you are an introvert or if you are shy, maybe a pitching partner can help. A lot of times people pitch in teams anyway, but also if it's a role I'm playing, well, then I may be an introvert or I may be a shy, but maybe shy, but my alter ego, Sasha Fierce, no, I'm just kidding. My alter ego is not, my alter ego understands these characters and their voices and can relate this to someone else in a way that can embody that energy that's needed and that passion that you have for the project. So maybe even thinking of it as I'm acting a role for these 15-20 minutes. And I need to learn my script. I need to learn my lines. And as Michelle and Joe both said, you need to get feedback from those. If you're a newer person and you don't have a team, so to speak, people you trust, like Michelle said, who are going to tell you the truth.
Like your mama who might hurt your feelings, but she gonna really tell you. My mother is like, she'll be like, I already heard that before. I saw that on Law and Order. You be like, you didn't see this on Law and Order? Yes, I did, episode 52. But also, yes, you can trust your friend. The thing is, you should be building a community around yourself of people. And again, when you're new, I remember when I first graduated from Columbia College in Chicago and I wanted to do a table read. Y'all, I invited my friends over and I bought some food. And I said, okay, I want to do a table read. I had enough scripts for everybody to read a role. And we just turned it into a really wonderful evening. And they gave me honest feedback. And I told them, yeah, give me honest feedback. Tell me what you like, tell me what you don't like, because I want to make it better. And I think that's the whole idea, is if you go in saying, I just want to be better, and you're asking for the feedback that, again, to make the presentation better, because honestly, every time you go out, that is a potential for a sale. It's the potential for you to get a show made, get a movie made, get a deal moving and going along. And just know that once you start, though, you will have so many projects you work on that will not go anywhere. And it will be frustrating sometimes. But I think the key is to always make sure you're doing projects that are personal to you also, right? You can be working with someone else, but like Camille talked about, the idea of a story based on her neighbor who was murdered, that's personal. That's a project that she can carry with her going forward because it's hers, versus like the project that I have with Mary J. Blige's company. It's a book that they brought, that I was brought into. So I'm glad that we sold it, because all the work that I did on that project, if it had not, I just have to go on because I don't have the rights to the book, right? I was brought in as well as the book was optioned. And the last question before we go to your questions. Oh, Joe?
I just want to say one thing to add on to that. Two things. For anyone, like no matter where you are in your career, join a writer's group and take classes, like continue to take classes, read the books, become as educated as you can in the process. I taught a screenwriting course a few years back. And one big thing for me, especially as a script coordinator by trade, one thing for me is formatting. It's very important. You want to make sure that if someone's going to read your work, that they can actually read it and that it flows. Formatting is so important. I think one thing that I really push about writers groups, I just joined my first writers group this year, and I'm so glad I did. I mean, in all the years I've been doing this, I just joined my first writers group. It really helps you get the feedback that not only that you need, like you can be looking for specific feedback on a certain character or a certain plot, or like anything. You can tell them, like, this is what I'm looking for feedback on. You don't have to give me feedback on the whole script. Just tell me if I'm in the right direction with this storyline. But join writers groups, take classes, like you'll never get too much information. And sometimes I will say you will get conflicting information from different places and different teachers or instructors and things like that. Take what works for you. And I think that's one thing that Michelle's always pushing as a teacher. And like I listen to what she tells her students, what works for you, what feels right when you're writing. You know what I mean? Like follow those rules. Like learn the technical aspect of it. You want to make sure you're not just putting some stuff out there that's not formatted properly, but also what's going to work for you. Like, what is your style? What is your process? And get comfortable with that. Get comfortable with that before you send it out to someone else. I think that's a big thing for you, like in your career, because again, it's your name, it's your reputation. So if you want to go out with a certain style, you just make sure like you're putting your best foot forward at all times.
I agree. I had a student who her format was great, but I remember her structure was a little bit off, but she wrote such emotionally beautiful, heartfelt work. And she was able to get staffed right away because she wrote from her heart. And I cannot emphasize that enough. And I agree with Joe completely. Formatting will turn people off. Invest in final draft and save yourself a lot of headaches. Ryan Coogler talks about how his formatting was really bad until his girlfriend, at the time she's now his wife, she bought him final draft as a birthday gift. And I tell my students all the time, if you're serious about it, you'll make the commitment, because you don't want to stand out on formatting. It's like, that's the one place you want to blend in. You don't want to look like, because we can tell right away when it's off. We're like, wait a minute, you know, these margins are off, right? This font, what is this font? Is this, what is it, like something else? So I think that's really important, especially when you're talking writing. And I also want to say, because one of the questions I was about to ask before we get to your questions is, what happens and what should you do if you sell your pitch? So I definitely want to pose that to Camille going forward. And, you know, what happens?
Yeah. So yeah, what happens if you do sell your pitch? Well, I think that one thing that all of us need, people, and this might be a later question or another conversation, is agent, you know, lawyer, manager, or whatever, but at minimum, what you're going to need if you should happen to get a pitch meeting and sell your pitch, you are going to need a lawyer. Some people don't even have agents and or managers, but they have an entertainment lawyer, because what is going to happen is the studio is going to come back to you and or network and say, oh, we love it, we want to move forward. And they're going to be presenting a contract to you at some point.
Yep.
And you are going to need a professional in entertainment law, not your cousin who does, you know, whatever accident.
Right.
To negotiate that contract in your best interest, but also based on where you are in your career. What will typically happen if you were more of a newcomer, if you didn't already have a team, they're going to want to partner you with a showrunner or possibly like a more senior writer or producer that's going to be working with you. Maybe you already got that even to get to this point. But you're going to go through the process, and it can be long. When I sold my projects, I think the negotiation process and doing all the contracts took 6 months. So be ready for the idea of this big high, oh my gosh, I sold my project, to now it's got to move through the business affairs, which is the part of a studio and or network that does all the negotiating between their lawyers and your representative, your lawyer. And that can take time.
It can.
That's one reason I don't go out, you know, doing on social media, all this stuff, whatever. Oh, this happened, that happened, because it takes a process for all the paperwork to be done.
Yeah.
After that paperwork is done, you are going to get commenced to write. Commence means beginning. They are going to say, wow, we got all the contracts done. We love you. Let's get started. And there could be one of several different things that they ask you to turn in first. A lot of times it's a story area document, but they are going to then say, okay, have a meeting with all hands on deck. And here's what we want you to do. We want you to turn in a treatment or a story area, or maybe it's the first draft of your script, and then you will get paid, ting, ting, and you will then start writing professionally for them. It's going to be different than when you're writing by yourself now, because you're going to have to turn it into the network, but you will be getting paid for it.
Yeah, and
I tried to encapsulate all that. I hope that was helpful.
No, that was very helpful, because you took me back to when, excuse me, I first sold the Honorable. First of all, when we sold it, I was in Budapest. I was teaching abroad in the fall of 2019, and my team did not want my team, which consists of Stage 29 and CBS didn't know. They didn't know that I was in Budapest, because my team was like, don't let them know. So y'all, I would have to get up at like 3 a.m., like, you know, time to be on a meeting at like, you know, 2 p.m. here in LA, like, hey, good afternoon. But I was on the phone. This was before Zoom. So it was really interesting to be on a call with maybe 12 people. Because now you really have to lean into like, who's talking, where you know your team's voices, but then you have to know everyone else's. So Zoom changed that. I'm gonna tell you something too. Don't act out of fear. So my team didn't want anybody to know I was out of the country because they thought it would show that I wasn't committed. Once they became my partners, they were like, girl, why didn't you just tell us you were in Budapest? We would have adjusted the meetings to fit your schedule. Because I remember one time Joe was on a call with me. I was in London and he was like patch me in. And it was funny because like he was up and it was so funny that he was on the call too. And we were just listening, right? I mean, you couldn't probably get away with that in Zoom, but the idea is that
You're like,
I know, it's like, who is that? And the idea that Camille touched upon that I loved is that, yeah, you're going to start working now for real. Like it's professional. You're now working with people. And my biggest advice is to show yourself some grace and show them some grace too, because everybody now is working collectively to try to get something made. Okay. And things will change. The show that I pitched to CBS that they bought and paid me and Ali Leroy to write. Originally, when they were like, we want to buy it, but we had a whole revenge element in the story. And they were like, could y'all take that out? Yo, it was the whole thing. It was like, so we had to kind of take a step back. It's like, okay, all right, let's figure out how to make it work. So then we ended up, rewriting it to their specifications. You're working again with a ton of people. Everybody has an opinion, a feedback, but it's okay to also say, could you clarify? What are you saying exactly? Like, make sure that you're clear once you sell and you start the writing process, that you're all in agreement. And you can have discourse, you can have conversations around why you don't agree on certain things. But it's this idea we were taught at UCLA. It's called the green dress, the red dress, right? If we're arguing about the color of a dress or something that is so insignificant in your story, give it to them. Give them that note. I'll change his shoes. Okay, fine. We won't use Nikes. We're going to use Adidas. If it's something that is fundamental to who you are, then you fight for that. Fight for the things that matter, because also they're trusting you to be the kind of creator that they can value and respect and work with. You don't want to be a pushover, but you also want to be so difficult. Nobody wants to work with you, right? So you find that middle ground where they say yes. One of the things that helped me a lot in my room, in my group, I'm the only Black woman in my team, my initial team. And then out of all the studio partners and everybody, there's one other Black woman exec. So there were times where I might have, seriously, 12 execs, and the majority of them are white, different other races. And every now and again, my producer, who is also a white woman, would say, hey, y'all, maybe we should listen to Michelle because she's the Black woman who's writing the Black woman, and she can tell us how it should go. And I would be like, thank you. So get you some people that are also allies that will speak and help protect your voice. And she had to actually say this to some of the men also. Okay, so just want to put that out there. And listen, I know because time is running out, but I want to dive into questions. I see their hands up. So Alexandra, how do we do that? Do you want to just kind of jump in?
Sure. Jamil Patterson, I see your hand up. Kitty Adams, I see you next. And then everyone else, can you just put your question in the chat and we'll go in order afterwards?
Yeah, I gotta take myself off mute. If I put on my glasses, because it's part of my costume, right? I'm not an actor or anything, but two things. I'm a newbie. I'm very much a newbie. I don't know anything about this process. I took some notes, so I learned a lot. I have more concepts for documentaries, but I have two concepts for movies. Both are remakes. No, one is a remake, one is a sequel, or kind of a sequel. And one I think can go to the theaters. The other one, I think it's more Netflix's, Amazon's. So that's one thing.
Okay.
The other part is,
hold on, go back. Did you have a specific question to what you just said?
Oh yeah, so just movie pictures, like how can I, work, try to work these projects in, you answer some of them, but I still like to know more in depth. And then my second question is, I'm a community organizer in San Francisco, and you know, one of the service niches is working with artists. So I know a lot of creatives, filmmakers. I know somebody that even writes comic books. And not to get too preachy and pie in the sky, but you know, especially with technology evolving, I think this could be a good career outlet for young Black urban youth. You know, so many of our people still are going to the street corners and stuff as an option. When, you know, I think Black people are very creative. A personal story of mine, one of my homeboys I grew up with, you know, he been to the pit and everything, and only to 20 years later write a book. But he could have been writing that book at 18 before he went to sell some dope, right? So I would like you to work with me. I can put my email in the chat. I think this can be an inroad to a lot of creative people in San Francisco and Oakland. This could be another outlet to save lives. So,
Well, first of all, let me hold on. Let me just
that's
answer the
it. That's
first.
it there, though.
Okay.
Okay.
First of all, thank you for sharing. And I agree that this is an excellent outlet for our youth. I was one of those youth. I wasn't necessarily hanging on the corner, but I come from the west side of Chicago, and I did not see this as an option for myself until somebody told me I could do this. So I agree with you completely. And the other thing with your multiple projects, here's the idea. Pick one that you feel is the one that you are most connected to emotionally, and you start working that one. You know, try to put that one in maybe some competitions, try to do some maybe table reads, do some things to try to get some energy going around one project, as opposed to when you say I have so many, it can be overwhelming to people when you're new. So you need to pick one project to start and see if you can get some traction with that one, and then you could bring up the other ones, but at least start with the one that is most personal, the strongest story, and something that also you think could be a great entertainment. At the end of the day, y'all, this is an entertainment business, right? And so we are entertaining people, so we have to remember that. But thank you so much. And Kitty Adams, you're up next.
Thank you very much. I'm a newbie as well, but I developed my script. It took 9 years. I hired some people to help me write it, get it in the right format. I am so strongly believing in this product. And it's an international film. So I sent it to Netflix, and they were like, okay, wow, there's something here. And then they turned it down, but I said, who can I go to? Who would like this? So I went to somebody else, and so what I'm trying to figure out is how to connect the dots, because what ended up happening is, you know, they said, oh, you need a producer attached to it. And the actor that I haven't, and then the producer's like, well, you really need to have some talent attached to your story. So then I go to the talent. They're like, you need to really have some money behind it. So how do you get that one leg of the stool? That's my first question. The second question, how do I protect my product? When I'm out there selling it, I don't want somebody to, you know, the example I was given, like, you know, all of a sudden they make the movie of Caesar, but they make it with zombies. So how do I have it registered with the Writers Guild, but I want to, like, how can I put myself out there, but also protect myself? And the other thing that came is I am like running strong with this, and then the strike happened. So I'm kind of wondering, that, you know, I pulled way back because, let's face it, you know, we're nothing if we're not together. So I'm not going to go out there and compromise the ideal. When can you get back in? You know what? So those are that's my 3-part question. Thank you.
Joe or Camille?
I think the response I have for finding someone, you gotta know when someone's giving you the runaround. I've had that before where they're like, okay, you need to go get a producer, or you need to go get the talent, you need to get the money. I think sometimes it can feel like you're getting the runaround. I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier about the relationship aspect. Like, you know, it's depending on like where you are in the industry, like finding someone that you can network with, who you can eventually tell your project about. Don't always go and just like, hey, I got this project I want to pitch you and let's talk about it. You know what I'm saying? Like, establish something there before you go straight into someone with just like pitching them a project, because it's very off-putting. from time, it can be off-putting depending on who you're talking to. I think that probably be like my best advice. I know it's kind of vague, but it's like one relationship can carry you a long way. I think you need to find someone who's developing and producing the types of projects you want to do and establishing something with them before you feel good to like move forward or move on with them.
Yeah, and I think there's also a process to ramping up, and getting to a place where you will start pitching, and whether it's that one relationship or other relationships, people are not going to be giving you the runaround, and they're going to seriously be interested in your content. Michelle talked about building energy around yourself as a creative and building energy, say, around a certain project. And I feel like that's really important too. Unfortunately, kind of the way that our business works or thinks is sometimes if some other entities that are well respected give their endorsement or their blessing, it's sort of like, then people are like, oh, that I want to hear that, or I want to know that person. So if someone was a semi-finalist in the Nickel Fellowship or in the Sundance Writers Lab, or they screened at the Palm Springs Film Festival or what have you, start to kind of build up this portfolio of energy to where when you get to the point, they're like, your name is Kitty. Oh, I want to hear Kitty's pitch because she's been doing all of these things and people are talking about her creativity or writing her stories or what have you. I mean, I think each one of us, we've put so many different irons in the fire. I know that before I ever even took a pitch meeting, I had screened short films at film festivals. I had been a semi-finalist in those writing contests. I didn't always win them, but there was this momentum that was building up that was then kind of opening a crack where if I called someone and said, you're an agent, I'm looking for an agent, and I have all of these things behind me that I've done, film festivals, writing contests and all of that, then they would read me. Or once getting the representation, or even if I didn't have the representation, friends seeing the hard work, that way I had busted my ass to do these other things, would then say, yeah, I'm going to sit down and talk to you because I see you've been doing all this other stuff. So that's the best advice I can add to that.
No, I support that completely. Also want to throw in the Austin Film Festival is also a really great place to also submit your work. They also give feedback. And then if you make it to like the certain rounds, you can come in as like a special guest, and screenwriters from all over come. And it's a really cool place. And because this is why, because execs and managers and agents, they're always looking for the next talent. Everybody wants that next new hot voice talent. And so you have to position yourself where they can find you pretty much. And as far as like worrying about somebody stealing your work, we all should be so lucky. And I say that in jest, but ultimately it's very hard to get read, period. But to protect yourself, I'm going to always suggest the Copyright Office, even over the Writers Guild, and I'm a WGA member. The Writers Guild protects you for 5 years, so you can do that, and it's more affordable. But the Copyright Office, you're protected for your life, plus I think it's 75 years after you die, because it also transfers to your heirs. So one of the ways that I tell my students to save a little bit of money is to put together, let's say if you have 2 or 3 scripts, you can put them together as a collection, right? And say, scripts for 2023, and then you submit it. Pretty much the Copyright Office is basically a storage facility, but in a court of law, it upholds and it trumps everything else. But it's not just proving that you wrote it before somebody else submitted their work, but that they had a way to access it. And that's usually why these cases are very difficult to pursue. But I mean, they can, but I would say, don't worry about that as much. There are so many ideas out there that are the same. Okay. But what's going to make your idea unique is you and how you tell it, where you're from. I'm from Chicago. When I write projects, I'm writing from my experience as a Black woman from the west side of Chicago, grew up with my, very eclectic family. My mother have 5 brothers. So I had 5 uncles. I'm writing from what I know to be true. And that's what no one can take from you. And that's what makes your story. We could give one assignment and say, we're all going to write the same story idea, right? But we're all going to write it differently, right? Camille's from Compton, Joe's from Nashville. Like, we're all from different places. And so that's going to definitely inform. So I would say just protect yourself legally, do what you can. And then whenever you're sending out material, email holds up in a court of law, y'all. Y'all know emails, it takes some, come on now, Trump about to go down over some emails and some calls that were recorded. And if that'll hold up in a court of law, you know, you can send an email and say, per your request, here is my blah, blah, blah. And it's dated, it's timed, it's stamped, but also protected outside of that. Alexandra, I believe this will be the last question. What's the process for sending work out as a screenwriter for TV or movies? Does the pitch go from an agent to a network, or does the writer reach out? Is there a slush pile like in book writing where unknown writers send work? Camille or Joe, what's the process for sending out work? Because both of you've done this.
For me, well, go ahead, Camille, please.
So it depends on whether you have representation or not. If you have representation, your representation will send out your work. If you don't, typically, let's say you have a relationship. Let's say you met someone at the Austin Film Festival and you struck up a relationship, maybe 6-7 months later, they said, hey, go ahead and submit your script. They will often ask you to send a release for the same reason that Michelle said, stating that you're not going to sue them if there's something they have similar, because they might have something similar in development. And after you sign that release and non-disclosure, then they will have you submit. A lot of times, if you have a relationship with that person, you could submit it directly, but you're going to always have to sign that release first if you don't have any representation like a lawyer or a manager. For a pitch, it's a little different than submitting a script. For a pitch, it would be setting up a pitch meeting. And if it's based on a relationship, hey, I have this new project, and then speaking to whoever that relationship is, and then them getting back with their assistant or what have you and saying, okay, here's some opportunities for you to come in and pitch your project. And they may still have you do a release before that.
Yeah, I want to say, Joe, I'm sorry, I wanted to go back to a couple other questions, but that was great, Camille.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, sorry. I'm going to kind of jump around because I'm kind of keeping my eye on the chat as well. And so I kind of want to touch on a question that Darshell asked, and I think Julia as well. You know, we were talking about the whole relationship aspect. I think we can kind of combine some answers here with the relationship aspect. You might be able to reach out to like some development people, like someone who actually works in development specifically, who might be able to give you guidance on not necessarily your project, but how to, as Camille touched on earlier, like she was giving a rundown of how she structures her pitches. And you may find someone who might be willing to help you format, shape your story and help you get it ready or put you in the direction of where it needs to go. You never know what an executive wants to hear. Tell them what you want them to hear. Like, you control the narrative. There's also someone who asked a question about SEOs and social media and stuff like that. I work for a marketing company called Be Hope, and one thing that I'm always pushing is you control your own narrative. And one thing about having a social media presence is right now we're in a very dangerous time in social media. You have to be very careful because, as I said, I say this all the time, first impressions are the most important thing, especially when your name is attached and your reputation. So if you want to build a following on social media, that's not a bad thing. Like Michelle and I actually built our friendship based on, like, she's always saying I'm funny. I'm not funny, but she's always like, you're funny.
Not true.
Stop it. She's like, you're always funny on Facebook. I was like, okay, but that's how we started writing comedy stuff together because she thinks I'm funny. And so building a social media presence will not hurt you. Just be very careful about how you use it and where you go from there. And as far as like the SEO question, I saw that. Self-distribution, let's come back to that. But as far as like pitching the people and like what you're pitching specifically, you want to be very direct. You want to know exactly what you're pitching. You want to know your show inside and out, and you want to make sure you convey that to the person you're pitching to as well. And that's why, like, when both Camille and Michelle were saying, like, pitch to your friends, pitch to people who don't know the business, because they're going to ask you questions. You can be like, damn, I never thought about that before you go to someone in the business, because that way you've already kind of covered your bases.
Oh, I agree.
So
Yeah,
I know,
I think the biggest thing to remember is that ultimately you're creating content that you hope will reach other people, right?
exactly.
So you have to be comfortable with getting feedback. Just like, come on, think about it. If a new show came out today, we all watched it, we're all going to have opinions. Everybody's not going to like it, right? So it's that same idea. So when you're pitching, everyone's not going to love your idea. And it doesn't mean that it's a bad idea. It's just, it's not a good fit for them. And you ultimately want to work with people that would really like the idea that you're working with, and they believe in you and your talents. Because what can happen is, if you build a relationship, and let's say you work 2 years on a project and it falls apart and you're like, oh God, we did all that work for nothing. What'll happen is you've built a relationship, but now you can do something else. As a matter of fact, right before the pandemic, right before the strike, those two things are both very traumatic for me, clearly. My producer on The Honorable, which is my first show, who I also went back with, I mentioned Apex, which is my sci-fi with Bashir. I just pitched her a brand new show right before the strike, and she loved it. She loved it so much, she was ready to take it again back to CBS as our studio partner, because she was like, I love it. So a lot of times, again, you're going back to the same people because you like them, you build a relationship. And that's really what it's about. It's really about finding the people that you want to work with, that you believe really have your back, that you also have theirs. And that it's this idea of like, you know how like when you're not in a room and somebody's talking about you, it's like, what are they saying? It's the same thing for you. What are you saying about them when they're not in the room? And like, even with Joe and I, when we worked on our project with Sugar Mamas, we just felt like the timing was off. Like, we loved the project. We got great feedback. We had a lot of great people we were working with, but it just didn't come together, but we still believe in it. Again, that story it's personal to us. So we still have, meetings where we just discuss it. Like, hey, we should put this out for a potential episode in the future, because that's the other thing. If you believe in it, you're going to continue to find a way to ultimately get it made, right? And just know this, do your research. Every show that's successful got turned down in Hollywood. Breaking Bad got turned down by everybody. They were like, nobody's gonna watch a show about this man trying to sell meth. Yes, we did. Yes, we did. And we loved it. We sure did. We were hooked from the pilot. We were like, oh, okay. That's what I'm saying. Nobody knows anything. People turn down everything. Every show gets turned. Mad Men got turned down from everybody. Like, everything gets turned down. So try to really understand that that's just the normal part of the way the industry works, and that you just have to pick yourself back up and just keep moving forward. Because ultimately, my good friend Stacey Sproul, her dad, he shared with her this great line that I love, which is, if you stay in line, your turn will come. And I think that's what we have to remember. It just depends on who's to say how long you're going to be in line. Like, all this time I've been in development, I still don't have a show on the air yet, but I'm working very diligently behind the scenes to make that happen. And so by the time it happens, they'll be like, oh, an overnight sensation. Bullshit. I'm like, okay, if that's what you want to say. But ultimately, we're working really hard. Writers work really, really hard behind the scenes. That's also why we're currently striking, because we want to be compensated for all of this work that we do while we're trying to get our work out there. So it is now 2:04, past our time, but I just want to thank everyone. Joe and Camille, thank you so much for sharing all of your experience with everyone. Alexandra, thank you so much for hosting us today.
I know we're out of time, Michelle. Can I say one more thing, though? I want to ask this one last question. So sorry, if I may.
Yes.
You broke up. To Bridget, who was asking about the SEO and marketing, just real quick. I think when it comes to like marketing and self-distribution, I think it's when you have something tangible that can go out. If you write a book, you're creating IP for yourself. And once that book goes out, then you can take that to managers and buyers and distributors and say, hey, I already have this. We can write something based on what's already been created. So I think that might be another career path, like not career path, but another path that you can take. Because people do that with comic books and other things like that. You create your own IP, and then you take it and you can turn that into a movie or a TV show. Okay, I'm done. Okay, thanks, Michelle.
And Alexandra mentioned, and I forgot. So those of you who like what we were sharing today, I am also doing a screenwriting workshop, which will be totally different than this, where we're going to talk screenwriting. And it'll be Saturday, August 26th. There is a link here in chat if you'd like to sign up. And this is where we're going to put the pen to paper, right? So it'll be sort of like if you were attending one of my classes where you get to really go through a process of kind of developing out an idea that you could hopefully, I don't know, one day turn into a hit show or a movie. Alexandra, you want to say anything, or Camille, before we go?
I want to take that class. No, it's been great with all of you. Thanks for everyone for hanging. I know when we get into these conversations, we love what we do so much. Sometimes we don't even pay attention to the time, but I do want to say this for everyone to kind of be easy on yourselves. And what I always tell my students and mentees, we have to realize that this is a building block process. Everyone had to start off as a PA, meaning a production assistant, a writer's assistant, or a gopher, or a personal assistant, or something where they could start to understand how this industry works. We don't go from graduating from college or an MFA program to all of a sudden selling hit TV shows. But when you are on the ground level and you're learning in whatever capacity those first 1 or 2 jobs are, you are building up skills, you are building up those relationships. And no matter where you live now, Zoom is making things easier to live different places, to realize it's a process. And one thing I want to say, and this may be hard for some people to hear, but a mentor once told me it's going to take you 5 to 10 years before you're really doing what you want to do from the time that you started. And I think probably for most of us, it's been now in that 5 to 10 years, you wasn't that you weren't doing anything, but you might have been someone's assistant or a script editor, a script coordinator, or a production assistant, or what have you. And you were building up to the, I want to be a writer, director, producer, but realize that 5 to 10 years was the germinating period while you were doing so many things to get to the point where you could actually be in front of studio heads selling a project. And you're not the first person who's done it, so don't think it's an anomaly or anything different. It really does take that time or those 10,000 hours or what have you. So be encouraged and realize it's a marathon, not a sprint.
I hate both. I hate marathons and sprints. I hate exercise. But
We're writers.
Alexandra?
I want to thank you all so much. You're amazing. And it's interesting to hear from the TV and screenwriter perspective, coming from the, MFA novel and nonfiction writer route, and hearing how it's different. And it's, I think anyone at any level could get something out of this conversation. I noticed there were a lot of people just beginning their idea, coming from the fiction world, already in the mix. And that's what I liked about this conversation. And I agree with you. When you get going talking shop, you can go forever, which is very interesting. And these kinds of conversations are the kind of thing that you can only get from human writers.
Yes.
That's what we want to support. We have tremendous respect for you, WGA writers, and keep fighting.
Well, thank you so much. And I look forward to anyone who will attend the workshop on the 26th. I look forward to having you again. That's going to be, we're going to get down to some nitty gritty now. We're going to get the work done. And hopefully some of you can at least leave with some, like the beginning of maybe your next great screenplay. Okay. So thanks everyone for coming. This was so much fun. And I will see you on the 26th. If not, I'm on social media. We all are. Oh, also follow folks, like find the people that you like and follow them and just check in and just see what people are up to. Because a lot of times we will talk about our projects, like Camille said, once those checks cash or the deal is done. So. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much for sharing your expertise.
Thank you for having us.